It was one of those days when the air around Buckingham Palace seemed unusually heavy, as though it carried the weight of something unspoken. Reporters who had been stationed outside for years could feel it too, their instincts sharpened from covering royal events that looked polished on the surface but churned with tension underneath. It wasn't a wedding, nor was it a funeral, yet the sense of anticipation was no less potent. Invitations had been issued discreetly, and only the highest-ranking members of the royal family, key Commonwealth dignitaries, and a handful of trusted press had been given clearance to attend. Inside the palace, the grandeur of the ballroom had been transformed into something almost ceremonial, but not quite the pomp of a coronation. Gold-trimmed chairs were aligned with military precision, the rich red carpet stretching like a bloodline toward the central dais. Above it hung a portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales. Not an official state painting, but one of the more intimate images captured in the mid-1990s. Her soft smile turned slightly to the side, as though she was mid-laugh. No one in the room could fail to notice that choice. It was deliberate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince William stood a few steps to the right of the seating arrangement, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in a manner that betrayed both discipline and strain. He had been raised to control every flicker of emotion in public, yet there was an unmistakable tension in his jaw. He glanced once toward the dais and then quickly away, his gaze settling on a point far beyond the gilded walls. Across the room, Prince Harry adjusted his tie, his expression less guarded but no less serious. The brothers had seen each other dozens of times over the years, but each meeting had carried its own shadow. This one was different, they both knew it. King Charles, tall and measured, entered the room in his ceremonial uniform. His eyes swept the audience briefly before settling on the portrait of Diana. Observers could sense that for him. This moment was not just about a royal announcement. It was personal. Whispers had already begun circulating for weeks that something unusual was about to happen, something that might alter the balance of royal recognition. It was this anticipation, mixed with the historical gravity of the setting, that kept every eye locked on the king. The atmosphere was not unlike the stillness before a storm. Guests seemed to hold their breaths between sentences. Even the sound of the chandelier's gentle hum felt amplified. One courtier later remarked that the tension in the room was unlike anything they'd seen since the days following Diana's funeral. The memory of her, the way she had captivated the world, and the complicated aftermath of her death, still clung to the family like a second skin. That memory was about to be invoked in a way that few could have imagined. The formalities began in the usual fashion: a brief welcome, acknowledgments to dignitaries, a few lines about service and dedication to the crown. But beneath the expected pleasantries was a current of anticipation that threatened to break at any moment. Charles's voice carried the deliberate weight of someone who understood the significance of every word he was about to say. This was not a casual gesture, nor was it merely symbolic. It would be a move that would etch itself into royal history and perhaps deepen a personal divide that had already become the subject of countless headlines. What was being whispered among aides, and occasionally hinted at in cautious press reports, was that the king intended to bestow a title unlike any other. A hereditary honor so deeply tied to Diana's name that it would forever link the bearer to her memory, in life and in legacy. The title, sources suggested, would not go to the expected heir, Prince William, but to his younger brother, Prince Harry. And that was the twist that left the air thick with speculation. Why Harry? Why now? And why with Diana's name at the very center of it? From a purely traditional standpoint, it made little sense. William was the elder son, the heir apparent, the future king. If any royal were to carry a hereditary honor linked to their mother's legacy, logic dictated it would be him. But this was not about logic, not entirely. This was about something deeper: memory, emotion, perhaps even redemption. In the weeks leading up to this day, there had been reports of late-night meetings at Balmoral and Sandringham, of phone calls placed to advisors both inside and outside the royal household. Those close to the family suggested that Charles had been wrestling with this decision for months. Some said it was his way of healing an old wound. Others argued it was a final act of defiance against a royal script that had always favored the firstborn. Still others believed it was an acknowledgement of Harry's unique bond with Diana, a bond that even the years of estrangement could not erase. The king paused mid-speech, his eyes flicking once more to the portrait. William shifted slightly, as though bracing himself for something inevitable yet still unwanted. Harry kept his gaze fixed on his father, a faint crease between his brows. The world outside these gilded walls had been told only that this would be an event honoring service and legacy. No one had been told the full truth. Not yet. And then Charles's voice lowered, his tone sharpening with deliberate care. He spoke of Diana, not as a royal consort, but as a woman of compassion, courage, and defiance. He spoke of her tireless work for the vulnerable, her ability to connect with people across boundaries, her resilience in the face of scrutiny. Every sentence seemed to tighten the emotional cord in the room. For some guests, it was a reminder of a beloved princess gone too soon. For others, it was a slow realization that the king was building towards something extraordinary. It was at this point that a few eyes turned toward William again. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain stillness in the way he stood, the kind of stillness that comes when a person steels themselves against disappointment. Harry, by contrast, seemed caught between curiosity and an uneasy awareness of where this might lead. The king's next words would not only define the day, but also potentially alter the public perception of his two sons. Whatever his reasons, Charles had decided that this moment and this title would belong to Harry. And yet, no one in the room knew exactly how it would be framed, what it would mean for the brothers, or how it would echo through the decades to come. Somewhere beyond the palace gates, the press waited, their cameras and live feeds ready to beam the announcement to millions. The world was about to hear a decision that could stir admiration, outrage, or both. And in that final breath before the reveal, all anyone could feel was the weight of Diana's memory pressing in on them. The unspoken question hanging in the air like a suspended verdict. When a father chooses between tradition and sentiment, who wins? The stillness inside the ballroom was deceptive. It looked like any other royal gathering. The gleam of polished silver trays, the muted shuffle of footmen in their immaculate uniforms, the gentle rustle of silk gowns and tailored jackets. But underneath, the tension ran like an electric current. Guests didn't speak in full sentences. They whispered in fragments, eyes darting between the stage and the brothers who stood apart, yet tethered by the moment about to unfold. Prince William had been in countless public ceremonies, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the pit of his stomach that no amount of royal training could smooth over. He had grown accustomed to being the focal point in matters of family legacy, the natural recipient of honors that tied him to the institution he would one day lead. Yet something about the arrangement of the room, the particular photograph of Diana, and the way his father's eyes kept flicking toward Harry told him that this day might not belong to him. Harry, on the other hand, seemed to be wading through a current of conflicting emotions. His life in the years since stepping back from royal duties had been a patchwork of independence, controversy, and carefully chosen public appearances. He had not stood in such a setting, under the direct gaze of his father and brother, for some time. Now here he was, back in the gilded cage, unsure if he was being welcomed, tested, or set up for something he didn't yet understand. The room carried its own kind of echo, as though the air itself remembered Diana. The portrait hanging above the dais wasn't just an ornament, it was a statement. The choice of that particular image, Diana in a simple cream suit, her head tilted, eyes bright, was unmistakable. It was not the stiff, regal portrayal of a princess, but the natural grace of a woman who had always belonged more to the people than to the palace. Those in attendance could sense that the king's decision to place her likeness there was more than a tribute. It was a deliberate tether to the announcement about to be made. King Charles had not been one to act impulsively, especially in matters that would be picked apart by the press and historians alike. But those close to him knew that when he made a personal decision, it often carried layers unseen by the public. This was a man who had lived his entire adult life balancing his own desires against the weight of an institution. Now, with the crown firmly on his head, he had the power to shape the narrative as he saw fit. And today, he intended to do exactly that. In the weeks preceding this event, subtle signs of an unusual royal maneuver had begun to emerge. A sealed envelope had been dispatched to the Lord Chamberlain's office. Certain protocol officers were told to be on standby without being given a clear reason. The ceremonial guard had been instructed to prepare for a high significance gathering without the usual flags of coronations or jubilees. There was also the matter of the king's private consultations, not just with royal historians, but with people who had known Diana personally. These quiet meetings, held in the private rooms of Clarence House in Balmoral, hinted that the king was weaving something deeply personal into the formal machinery of the monarchy. Royal watchers speculated endlessly. Some believed Charles was preparing to bestow an honor on William that would tie him irrevocably to Diana's memory, cementing his role not just as her son, but as her successor in the hearts of the public. Others wondered if it might be a broader initiative, perhaps a charitable foundation or a new national holiday in Diana's name. Yet, the king's secrecy ensured that no one could guess the truth with certainty. And then there were those, the few who truly understood the undercurrents within the family, who suspected that Harry was at the heart of this. That suspicion seemed unthinkable to many. Harry had, after all, stepped away from royal duties, spoken openly about his grievances with the institution, and relocated his life across the Atlantic. Why would the king center such a deeply symbolic act around a son who had chosen to leave? Why risk the optics of rewarding someone who had so publicly challenged the monarchy? The answer, if it existed, lay buried in the complicated web of love, regret, and memory that tied this family together. Charles had been there in the days after Diana's death, trying to shield his sons from a tidal wave of grief while also navigating the cold machinery of state mourning. He had seen firsthand the way Harry clung to his mother's memory, sometimes in ways more raw and unfiltered than William could afford to. And perhaps, just perhaps, this day was his way of acknowledging that. A hush fell over the ballroom as Charles stepped up to the podium. The sound of his shoes on the wooden platform seemed unnaturally loud. He began with the expected formalities, but his voice carried a gravity that made people lean forward in their seats. He spoke of service, of duty, of the ties that bind one generation to the next. His words moved gradually toward the personal, and soon Diana's name left his lips. The shift in the room was immediate. Some guests glanced at William, others at Harry, as though trying to measure the emotional impact in real time. Charles described Diana not in the rigid language of royal protocol, but as a mother, a humanitarian, a woman who had touched lives in every corner of the globe. He recounted her bravery in walking through minefields, her defiance in confronting stigma around illness, her ability to connect with those the world had overlooked. He spoke slowly, his gaze sweeping the room, his tone softening in moments as though he was addressing not a gathering of officials but the sons who stood before him. Every word pulled the memory of Diana closer, until it was almost as if she was in the room. Guests could feel it. The subtle tightening in their chests, the way their own memories of her filtered through the king's narrative. But beneath the sentimentality was the rising awareness that something unprecedented was about to happen. This wasn't just a eulogy in delayed form. This was a prelude. William's gaze remained steady, but his fingers curled slightly against his palm, a barely perceptible sign of the storm brewing beneath his composure. Harry shifted his weight, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second. Both men knew their mother's legacy was a shared inheritance, but in a family like theirs, the question of who carried it publicly was far from simple. The king paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be felt. Cameras clicked softly in the background. The room seemed to inhale all at once, waiting for the words that would finally reveal the truth. And when Charles's lips parted again, the tone of his voice made it clear. This was not a standard recognition. This was something entirely new, and it was going to change the brothers' lives forever. Before the world knew the term, the People's Princess, before her face became a symbol of compassion and rebellion within the walls of the monarchy, Diana Spencer was a young woman whose life would be rewritten by fate. The legacy she left behind was more than charity galas and royal photographs. It was an enduring sense of empathy, a connection to ordinary people that transcended status, and a fierce determination to protect her children from the coldness she had experienced herself. For William and Harry, Diana was not a figure of mythology. She was their mother. She was the one who would sneak them out of the palace to eat fast food, the one who would kneel down to their level rather than stand over them like a figure of authority. She was also the one who shielded them, as best she could, from the harsh realities of their position. That sense of warmth and protection became the foundation for how both brothers understood her legacy, though each would interpret and carry it in different ways. From the moment she entered the royal family, Diana broke the mold. She refused to let tradition dictate every choice, and she carved out her own definition of what it meant to be a royal. She touched AIDS patients when others recoiled, held the hands of landmine victims in war-torn nations, and connected with the homeless in a way that was deeply personal. For her, it wasn't about the cameras. It was about the human being in front of her. This authenticity made her beloved, but it also made her an unpredictable figure in a family that thrived on control. The very traits that made Diana adored by the public sometimes caused friction behind palace walls. She was emotional where others were reserved, outspoken where others were discreet. But for William and Harry, these qualities were the very essence of her strength. William, as the elder, saw in her a model for public service, a way to blend empathy with the responsibilities of leadership. Harry, on the other hand, absorbed her defiance, her unwillingness to conform, her instinct to rebel when something felt wrong. When Diana died in 1997, the shock was not confined to the royal family. The streets of London became rivers of flowers, with millions mourning a woman they had never met, yet felt they knew. For William, who was just 15, the loss meant stepping into a protective role for his younger brother, even as he navigated his own grief. For Harry, only 12 at the time, it meant clinging to the memory of her laughter, her voice, the way she made him feel safe. That difference, the heir feeling the need to be strong, the spare feeling the freedom to remember, would subtly shape their lives in the years to come. Over the decades, both brothers have paid tribute to Diana in their own ways. William named his first daughter Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, ensuring his mother's name would live on in the direct line to the throne. He has also supported causes she championed, from mental health awareness to homelessness. Harry, meanwhile, founded charitable initiatives for veterans, spoken openly about his own struggles with grief, and often invoked his mother's name when explaining his choices. Harry nodded. "I understand." But in his eyes, there was more gratitude, yes, but also a hint of unease. He knew that accepting this honor would mean stepping, however briefly, back into the world he had chosen to leave. And he knew it would mean standing across from William in a way that would inevitably be compared, analyzed, and judged. By the time the private conversations had ended, the pieces were in place. Only a handful of people knew the truth, and each understood the weight of what was about to happen. The day of the announcement would be more than a ceremonial moment. It would be the culmination of whispered plans, guarded words, and decisions made in rooms where the air itself seemed to carry the memory of a woman whose legacy was now about to be claimed. The days leading up to the announcement had the kind of subdued intensity that only those close to the monarchy could detect. For the public, all that was visible were a few carefully crafted press releases mentioning an upcoming royal commemoration and the celebration of legacy and service. No mention of titles, no indication of the significance of the event. But for those inside the palace walls, there was a hum of activity that betrayed the truth. Something was coming, and it would not be ordinary. The first sign was the unusual tightening of the guest list. In most royal events, invitations were sent months in advance, but this time, the official couriers moved discreetly, delivering cream-colored envelopes sealed with the royal crest to a select few. These were not sent through the usual channels. Instead, they were hand-delivered, often accompanied by a short verbal instruction from the aide. Discretion is requested. Within the palace, the logistics teams worked behind closed doors. The royal household's protocol office coordinated directly with the Garter Principal King of Arms, the official responsible for heraldic matters. The wording of the ceremonial script was rehearsed privately, with even some senior staff kept in the dark about its full contents. Those who had been given access to the details walked with an air of guarded caution, aware that a single misplaced word could unleash speculation before the king was ready. In the media, rumors began to swirl, though they were faint at first. Some royal correspondents speculated about a charitable initiative honoring Diana. Others guessed it might be the announcement of a large-scale restoration project tied to one of her patronages. But in the hushed corners of the press circuit, a few seasoned journalists muttered about something more significant, a title. These whispers were never printed. Without confirmation, the risk of looking foolish was too high. But it meant that anticipation was quietly building even before the story began to take shape. William kept his public appearances in the days before the event measured and composed. He attended a youth sports program in East London, where he spoke warmly about the importance of community, smiling easily for cameras and engaging with the children. But those who watched closely noted that his answers to reporters' questions were unusually short, his tone carrying a faint undercurrent of distraction. He knew the ceremony was approaching. He knew what it meant. And yet, duty dictated that he maintain the same outward calm he had always displayed. Harry, across the Atlantic, was a different picture entirely. The palace had arranged for his arrival to be discreet, avoiding the media circus that usually followed his visits to the UK. He was flown in on a private aircraft, landing at RAF Nordholt under the cover of night. A convoy of unmarked vehicles whisked him to Frogmore Cottage, where he would stay until the day of the announcement. It was a return to the country that had once been home, though under circumstances that felt far removed from the life he had left behind. Inside the palace, preparations for the setting were meticulous. The chosen location was the Grand Ballroom, a space steeped in history, where monarchs had hosted state banquets and honored military heroes. On this occasion, it would be transformed into a space of remembrance and recognition. Fresh arrangements of white roses, Diana's favorite, were brought in from Windsor Gardens. The lighting was adjusted to cast a warm, golden glow over the room, ensuring that the portrait of Diana above the dais would be the focal point. Every detail was deliberate. The seating arrangement placed William and Harry equidistant from the king's podium, a visual gesture of balance. Senior royals would sit in the front rows, their positions reflecting both rank and relationship to the late princess. Behind them, Commonwealth dignitaries and invited guests would fill the hall. The press would be positioned at the far end, their cameras set to capture every expression. In the days before the ceremony, Charles remained largely unseen in public. He spent long hours in his private study, reviewing notes, adjusting his speech, and occasionally taking quiet walks in the palace gardens. Those close to him described his mood as contemplative, even a little restless. It was not often that he allowed personal sentiment to shape an official act, and he understood the gravity of what he was about to do. Tension within the family was palpable, though unspoken. Camilla, ever pragmatic, maintained her composure, offering gentle reminders about the importance of unity in public. Princess Anne, known for her directness, reportedly kept her thoughts to herself, though her raised eyebrow when the plan was first explained had said enough. The younger royals, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were not present for the conversations, though William, by all accounts, was careful to keep their routines unaffected in the days before. The final rehearsal took place 2 nights before the announcement. The ceremonial staff walked through the sequence of events, the arrival of the guests, the opening remarks, the reading of the proclamation, and the presentation of the scroll to Harry. Standing in for the princes were junior aides, their expressions far less telling than the real recipients would be. The king rehearsed his speech with quiet intensity, each pause and inflection calibrated to convey the weight of the moment without revealing more than necessary before the key sentence. Outside the palace, London seemed to move on as usual, yet the royal beat reporters could sense a story brewing. They clustered near the palace gates in small groups, trading guesses about the purpose of the gathering. Some speculated it would be a rare joint initiative between William and Harry, a symbolic gesture to demonstrate unity. Others wondered if it might be the announcement of a new charitable trust in Diana's name. The night before the ceremony, a light rain fell over London. Inside Frogmore Cottage, Harry sat alone for a time in the small study, scrolling through photographs stored on his phone. Images of his mother, some public, others private, appeared on the screen, her smiling in the gardens at Kensington, her holding his hand as they crossed a street, her laughing at something out of frame. Across the city, William sat in his own residence, speaking quietly with Catherine. Their conversation was private, but the mood was serious. She listened, offering comfort without judgment, knowing that the day ahead would be challenging for her husband in ways the public might never see. By dawn, the palace grounds were already stirring. Security tightened, with plainclothes officers joining the ceremonial guard. Vehicles carrying dignitaries began arriving through the front gates. The ballroom was given a final inspection, the roses refreshed, the lighting checked. The ceremonial scroll, bound in dark blue leather and embossed with the royal crest, was placed on a velvet-covered table beside the podium. As the guests began to take their seats, there was a quiet hum of conversation, the kind that carries a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. The knowledge that something important was about to be announced was clear, but the exact nature of it remained a mystery to most in attendance. Even among those who suspected, there was an unspoken agreement to wait for the king's words. The build-up had been deliberate, methodical, a choreography of secrecy and ceremony designed to lead to a single moment. When that moment came, it would be broadcast around the world, dissected in headlines, debated in drawing rooms and living rooms alike. But for now, the stage was set, the players in position, and the weight of history hovered in the air, waiting for the first words to be spoken. The morning of the ceremony unfolded with a precision that only the royal household could achieve. The weather seemed to conspire with the mood. Clear skies, but a pale, almost muted sunlight that softened the colors of the palace grounds. As the clock struck 10, the first motorcades began arriving. The polished black vehicles glided through the palace gates, the gold crests on their doors catching the light in brief flashes before disappearing beneath the archway. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was cool but carried a faint fragrance of fresh roses. The white blooms, arranged in tall crystal vases, lined the edges of the room, their petals reflecting the soft glow from the chandeliers above. The portrait of Diana presided over the gathering, its placement deliberate, directly behind the king's podium. The choice of that image, her warm, genuine smile, was the first unspoken signal to those present that this was not an ordinary event. Guests filed in with the measured grace expected at such occasions. Senior royals took their designated seats in the front rows. The Prime Minister arrived with members of the cabinet, accompanied by key figures from the Commonwealth. Representatives from charities Diana had supported during her life were scattered throughout the audience. Men and women who had worked with her on campaigns for AIDS awareness, homelessness, and landmine clearance. William entered first among the royal sons, his uniform immaculate, medals gleaming softly in the light. His face was composed, his posture regal, but there was a stillness to his movements that suggested an effort to maintain control. He exchanged brief nods with several dignitaries before taking his seat to the king's right. Harry entered minutes later, wearing a formal morning suit rather than a military uniform. His expression was a blend of solemnity and curiosity, his eyes scanning the room quickly before settling momentarily on the portrait above the dais. If he felt the weight of the moment, he did not display it openly, though the set of his shoulders betrayed a certain tension. He took his seat to the king's left, separated from William by a ceremonial aisle. The murmur of quiet conversation faded when the chamberlain stepped forward to announce the arrival of His Majesty. All rose as King Charles entered, dressed in a tailored morning coat with a subtle gold pin, a gift from Diana in the early years of their marriage. His steps were deliberate, his face betraying none of the inner contemplation that had consumed him in the days leading up to this point. Once he reached the podium, Charles paused, letting the silence settle fully over the room. His gaze swept slowly across the audience before finally resting on the portrait behind him. When he began to speak, his voice was steady, warm, but edged with the formality required by the occasion. He opened with acknowledgments to the dignitaries present, the charities represented, and the members of the public who had gathered outside the palace gates. Then, with a measured breath, he shifted the tone. "Today," he said, "we gather not merely to honor the past, but to ensure that its light guides the future." The mention of the future was deliberate, a signal that what was coming would not be confined to remembrance. He spoke of service, not just to the crown, but to the people, and of the enduring power of compassion. His words began to weave the image of Diana, painting her as a figure who had transcended her role to become a voice for the voiceless. He recounted her fearlessness in visiting AIDS wards when fear and stigma kept others away, her willingness to kneel beside children in war-torn nations, and her belief that humanity was the greatest strength a leader could possess. As the king spoke, the atmosphere shifted from ceremonial to deeply personal. The room was silent, but for his voice, and several guests could be seen blinking back tears. William's gaze remained fixed ahead, his face unmoving, while Harry's eyes occasionally lowered, as if replaying private memories that the king's words stirred. Charles then turned to the theme of legacy. A legacy, he said, is not merely what we leave behind in name or in stone. It is what we inspire in others, what we pass forward in deeds and in spirit. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience once more before settling briefly on his sons. The chamberlain stepped forward again, this time carrying a leather-bound scroll embossed with the royal crest. Placing it gently on the velvet-covered table beside the king, he stepped back. This movement, subtle though it was, caused a ripple of awareness through the audience. Something significant was about to be proclaimed. The king's next words were deliberate. It is in the spirit of such legacy that I have chosen today to establish a new hereditary title within the royal family. This title will serve as a living tribute to a woman whose light has never dimmed, whose influence remains as strong today as it was in her lifetime. He let the sentence breathe before continuing. It is my honor to proclaim the creation of the title, the Duke of Diana's legacy. The reaction in the room was immediate, though subdued in sound. A collective intake of breath, the faint shuffle of bodies leaning forward, the flash of camera shutters from the press section. William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Harry's eyes widened slightly before he regained composure. Charles continued, "This title shall be borne by my son, Prince Henry Charles Albert David, in recognition of his enduring commitment to causes that reflect the compassion and courage embodied by his mother." As the words settled over the room, the air seemed to grow heavier. For the audience, the announcement was both stunning and deeply symbolic. For the brothers, it was something far more personal, a public declaration that would inevitably be measured, compared, and debated for years to come. The king gestured for Harry to stand. Rising from his seat, Harry crossed the aisle and approached the podium. Charles took the scroll from the table and presented it to him with both hands. Harry accepted it, inclining his head in acknowledgement, though the flicker of emotion in his eyes hinted at the complexity of the moment. Applause broke out. Polite at first, then growing into a fuller expression of approval. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing the image of father and son against the backdrop of Diana's portrait. William clapped along with the rest, his expression steady, but those who knew him well could see the restraint in his movements. With the presentation complete, Harry returned to his seat, the scroll resting across his lap. The king concluded his remarks with a call to action, urging all present to continue the work Diana had begun, to embody her compassion in their own lives. As he stepped back from the podium, the ceremony moved seamlessly into its next phase, a series of brief speeches from representatives of charities linked to Diana, each recalling personal moments of working with her. Yet, for all the words spoken that day, it was the image of that single moment, Charles handing Harry the scroll, the title echoing in the air, that would dominate headlines and conversations around the world. Even before the applause inside the grand ballroom had fully faded, the news was already rippling outward. The palace press team had been prepared for this exact moment, their embargoed statements queued and ready to be released to global media outlets the instant the king uttered the words, "The Duke of Diana's legacy." Within seconds, the announcement appeared on the official royal website and the monarchy's social media accounts. A polished photograph accompanied the post, King Charles presenting the scroll to Harry, the portrait of Diana looming gracefully in the background. Outside the palace gates, a crowd of royal watchers, journalists, and curious onlookers reacted in real time. Gasps, murmurs, and the sharp tapping of camera shutters filled the air. Several people reached for their phones to share the news, their posts rapidly gaining traction online. By the time the official ceremony concluded inside, the story had already made the front page of nearly every major news outlet in the UK and was trending globally on social media. Television networks cut into regular programming to broadcast the footage. On the BBC, the anchor's voice carried the restrained awe typical of such occasions, describing the moment as a profound and unprecedented act by the king. Sky News took a more speculative tone, with commentators openly discussing the emotional weight of bypassing the heir in favor of the younger son. Across the Atlantic, American networks seized on the human interest angle, framing it as a gesture of reconciliation between father and son after years of tension. In Australia, Canada, and other Commonwealth nations, the story was met with a mix of fascination and debate. Some saw it as a deeply personal tribute to Diana's humanitarian legacy, an acknowledgement that Harry had carved his own path in ways that reflected her spirit. Others questioned whether the decision might inadvertently deepen the rift between William and Harry, especially given the public nature of the honor. Social media became a battleground of opinion within minutes. Supporters of Harry celebrated the decision, flooding timelines with images of him alongside his mother from years past. "The right choice," one widely shared post read, because Diana's compassion lived most fiercely in Harry. Others took a more critical stance, suggesting the move undermined William's role as heir and sent a confusing message about the monarchy's values. "Legacy should flow through the line of succession," argued one commentator, "and William has spent decades honoring his mother's memory and service to the crown." Royal correspondents scrambled to provide context. Those with insider contacts hinted at the months of deliberation that had preceded the decision, noting that Charles's choice was rooted in personal sentiment as much as in symbolic politics. Analysts speculated that the king had sought to balance the monarchy's future with an acknowledgement of its past, using Diana's name to bridge the gap between the institution and the public. In Kensington Palace, where William and his family resided, aides worked to craft a statement that struck the right balance. It needed to express support for the king's decision while also reaffirming William's ongoing commitment to his mother's causes. By late afternoon, the official statement was released. The Prince of Wales welcomes the creation of a title in honor of his late mother, whose work and compassion continue to inspire people across the world. He remains dedicated to upholding her values through his own service. It was concise, measured, and diplomatic, but it did little to quell speculation about his private feelings. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan issued their own statement from Frogmore Cottage. "The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are deeply honored by His Majesty's decision. The Duke of Diana's legacy is committed to continuing the work his mother began, advocating for compassion, dignity, and service." The message was gracious, yet those who analyzed royal communications noted the subtle emphasis on independence, the suggestion that Harry would define the role on his own terms. Public reaction outside the UK varied widely. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had built much of their post-royal brand, coverage leaned heavily into the narrative of a father recognizing a son's worth beyond the constraints of tradition. In Commonwealth countries with strong Republican movements, the announcement was received with cautious respect, seen as a rare moment when the monarchy made an overtly emotional choice rather than a purely political one. International charity leaders also weighed in. Representatives from organizations Diana had supported praised the king's decision, expressing hope that the title would bring renewed attention and resources to the causes she had championed. One former colleague of Diana's from her anti-landmine campaign remarked in an interview, "This isn't just a symbolic title if Harry takes it seriously. He has the platform, the passion, and now the official link to make a real difference." Yet, for all the positive reactions, there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension in the commentary. The fact that William had been bypassed could not be ignored. Talk shows dissected the optics, with panelists debating whether this was a bold act of fairness or a calculated risk that might fuel long-term division. Some speculated openly that the move was Charles's way of addressing past criticisms about his treatment of Diana, framing it as a gesture of redemption. In the days that followed, newspaper headlines reflected the split in perception. The Times ran with "A King's Gift," honoring Diana's spirit through Harry. The Daily Mail opted for a more pointed angle, bypassing the heir. What does Charles's choice mean for the future of the monarchy? Online, hashtags related to the announcement continued to trend, often paired with side-by-side photographs of Diana with each of her sons. The footage of the ceremony itself was replayed endlessly, each viewing offering fresh fuel for analysis. Commentators noted the firmness of Charles's voice, the subtle dip of William's chin during the proclamation, the way Harry's eyes lingered on the scroll as if absorbing the weight of it. In one widely discussed moment, as the applause died down, Harry glanced briefly toward his brother, a look too fleeting to decode, but enough to spark endless speculation about what passed silently between them. What made the announcement resonate so powerfully was that it was not just about the monarchy. It was about family, memory, and the unshakable pull of a legacy that refused to fade. It was a reminder that even in the most tradition-bound institution in the world, personal sentiment could still upend expectations. And for all the debate it stirred, it was undeniable that the name Diana had once again captured the world's attention, not as a relic of the past, but as a living influence on the choices of the present. The impact of King Charles's decision rippled outward from the palace like a stone dropped into still water, each ring touching a different corner of society. In pubs, offices, schoolyards, and living rooms, people were already discussing the announcement by midday. For many, it was the first time in years they had seen a royal decision ignite such an immediate emotional response, one that was as much about the heart as it was about the crown. On the streets of London, reactions varied wildly. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, tourists snapped photographs beneath the Union Jack, their conversations shifting between awe and curiosity. Some were visibly moved. An elderly woman clutching a small bouquet of white roses told a reporter she had come to lay them in front of the palace in Diana's memory. "It feels like she's here again, in a way," she said softly. Harry was always her boy. You could see it in the way she looked at him. Not everyone saw it as a purely sentimental gesture. Near St. James's Park, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit shook his head as he scrolled through the announcement on his phone. "It's a beautiful tribute," he admitted, "but William's the heir. It sends a strange message when the heir is passed over for something tied to their mother's legacy." His voice carried the mild indignation of someone who valued order and tradition over personal symbolism. The media wasted no time amplifying the divide. Morning shows booked royal commentators, charity representatives, and political pundits to dissect every angle. Some praised the king's courage in making a decision rooted in sentiment rather than protocol. Others warned that the choice risked creating a lasting shadow over William's position. One royal historian noted that in centuries of British monarchy, it was rare, almost unheard of, for a sovereign to create a title of such personal significance and award it to a younger son instead of the heir. The humanitarian sector, particularly those who had worked with Diana, responded with open warmth. Charities she had supported released statements of approval, highlighting Harry's record of work with veterans, his advocacy for mental health, and his commitment to continuing his mother's approach of meeting people where they were, without pomp or distance. Leaders from anti-landmine organizations spoke about the renewed visibility the title could bring to their causes. A spokesperson for a children's hospice Diana had visited decades earlier called it a moment that feels right, no matter the politics. Across the Atlantic, the announcement became a trending topic within minutes. American morning shows embraced the emotional narrative, casting it as a moment of reconciliation and recognition. On social media, the prevailing tone was celebratory, with hashtags like #DukedOfDiana'sLegacy and #HarryHonorsDiana climbing rapidly. Images of Diana with Harry as a child circulated alongside photos from the ceremony, reinforcing the idea that this was a passing of the torch from mother to son. But in the UK, the discourse was more layered. In the pages of The Guardian, an opinion piece lauded the king for placing humanity above hierarchy, while The Telegraph featured a headline that read, "A touching tribute, or a risk to royal unity?" The Daily Mail, ever eager for a sharp headline, ran a split front page. One side with a glowing tribute to Diana and Harry, the other questioning the decision to bypass William. The reactions within royal circles were equally complex, though less visible to the public. According to palace insiders who spoke anonymously to certain outlets, there was an undercurrent of unease. Some senior courtiers feared the move might embolden public calls for further breaks from tradition. Others privately expressed concern that William's feelings, however carefully concealed, would be difficult to manage in the months ahead. Among the general public, personal loyalty played a major role in shaping reactions. Those who felt connected to Diana's rebellious, compassionate nature tended to support the decision wholeheartedly, seeing Harry as the natural choice to carry her name. Those who identified more with the stability and continuity embodied by William often viewed the bypass as a breach of the unspoken rules that had long governed the royal family. At the same time, there was an undeniable surge of interest in Harry's next moves. People wanted to know how he would use the title, whether it would bring him back into the royal fold in some capacity, or if it would remain largely symbolic. Journalists speculated about whether the honor might soften the couple's relationship with the press or if Harry and Meghan would double down on their independent projects, using the title to bolster their own platform abroad. In communities outside London, the response carried a more personal tone. In a cafe in Cardiff, a woman in her 30s recalled how she had once met Diana during a charity event in Wales. "She was different from the others," she said. "She looked you in the eye and made you feel like you mattered." If Harry's got that from her, then it's only right he carries her name forward. On the other hand, in a pub in Edinburgh, a group of men debated the long-term implications over pints of ale. "Nice gesture," one said, "but it's politics, isn't it? Everything's politics with them. Charles knows what he's doing. It's a way to control the narrative around Harry without giving him real power." Even among Diana's old friends and associates, the reactions weren't uniform. Some felt it was an overdue acknowledgement of Harry's role in preserving his mother's humanitarian spirit. Others quietly expressed surprise, noting that William had also been deeply involved in her causes and that giving the title to Harry might unintentionally fuel division. As the week wore on, the announcement remained a top story. Editorial boards debated whether it was an act of fairness or favoritism. Political cartoonists had a field day, drawing caricatures of a bemused William and an awkwardly triumphant Harry beneath Diana's watchful gaze. Talk radio hosts fielded calls from listeners who alternated between heartfelt praise and cautious skepticism. The palace's communications team, well aware of the public mood, released a carefully timed set of photographs in the days following the event. Candid images of William and Harry together at the post-ceremony reception, speaking in what appeared to be a civil, if not entirely warm, exchange. The images were meant to project unity, though analysts noted that the physical space between them was slightly more than casual conversation required. If the king had hoped to reignite public discussion of Diana's work, he had succeeded. Charities bearing her name reported spikes in donations. Old interviews of Diana were replayed on television, her words about kindness and duty finding new audiences. The public was talking about her again, not in the context of tragedy, but in the language of living legacy. And yet, beneath all the celebration, the speculation, and the sentiment, there lingered a question that could not be easily answered. Had this act truly brought the family closer together, or had it simply redefined the lines that separated them? The answer, perhaps, would only reveal itself in the months and years to come.